Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be talking about Odd Taxi. I'm just going to get this out of the way. I love this anime. Like, I've seen so many people give good reviews on this anime, and I was very curious as to why, and I understand why. This anime, I really did love this anime. It was so much fun, but I can go over that later on in the spoilers and spoiler-free sections. But yeah, we're just going to hop into the, what is this show? So basically, the whole concept of Odd Taxi is we follow a walrus named Arakawa who runs his own little taxi where he ends up getting involved in all this stuff involving a missing girl, and he just gets wind up in all this crazy stuff that normally a person like him would get involved in, and it just creates this constant loop of things where he's trying to form a way to make this all work out in the end without really knowing how to deal with every single situation. And yeah, that wasn't an amazing summary, but we're just gonna roll with it. So it's spoiler-free thoughts. I'm going to say one thing here. I'm very happy with how much development all of the different characters get in this show, because without spoiling who's in this show, there are a lot of characters in here who get a lot of different development, and I really like how Arakawa, even though he is the main focus of this series, he's not the only one who has focus. Every single character, for the most part, who has at least a name and a face to them, have a role to play in all this. They actually have something behind them, and I truly do appreciate that because it lets us get a bit into each and every character. And I thought it was really interesting since every single character in this show, for the most part, has a really interesting story going along with them. Even if it's shallow and simple, or intense and deep, there's always something going on with some character in this show, and I really like that, with maybe one or two exceptions. For the most part, almost every single character goes through something in this show, and I really do appreciate that. And honestly, I'm just amazed at how many mysteries the show managed to keep. There was this one mystery that's obvious from the beginning. It's super easy to tell where it's going. But then you get to the final episode of this show when they drop 3 different bombshells, and you're just sitting there I didn't see that coming at all. That completely shocked me. Note, there is something at the end that I would like to talk about actually, but that's safe for the spoiler section. But this show did a really good job with hiding a bunch of its twists, and has kept me invested throughout the whole show. I really did enjoy it and thought it was a very entertaining show, as every single character kept me really intrigued about what was going to happen next. And by the time the final episode happened, all I could think was, dang, what a ride. It was so crazy, and I just enjoyed this anime so much. The characters are fun. Arakawa is a really interesting protagonist, especially with the later episodes. And yeah, that's all I can really say without spoiling anything, so we're just gonna hop into the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp when the spoilers end. If you have seen the show, I recommend sticking around and hearing my thoughts, but if you haven't, just get to the end so you don't get spoilers. But yeah, if you have seen it, stick around. You can comment in if you agree with my opinions or not. But yeah, we're just gonna count up to 5 and enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so one of the big things I kind of want to talk about is the whole murder element of this show. Throughout this show, it's talked about this missing girl, and it's revealed in a later episode that the missing girl was found dead in the ocean. And you gotta wonder who was the killer behind all this. And throughout the show, they're trying to hint maybe Arakawa had the missing girl, but it was pretty obvious that he didn't, since it was just a cat. But it's just the way they handle it was so interesting, especially since by the time the final episode came along, I'd almost forgotten about the murder case entirely, even though it was an episode or two before that we actually saw the murder itself take place. And it was so shocking to me when I learned about who the actual killer was, that being this character, I believe his name is Sakura or something, this cat lady who ends up killing she's part of an idol group, and she ends up killing one of the idol group members so she could take her place. And it's just, I didn't see that coming at all, since she was in the background for a majority of the show, and honestly, I kind of wrote her off as a side character. So seeing that, especially with the way it ended, which I can go over that in a bit, just the way it ended with her is even more crazy. And if the show did end the way it did without that little movie that came out afterwards, then I probably would have found this show to be a bit more awkward with its ending, which again, we can talk about that in a bit. But another thing I kind of want to talk about is some of the side characters we don't have to focus on, but we end up doing anyway. There's this group of characters called Baba, as well as this other character called Shibagaki, and basically their whole thing was that they were trying to be a comedy routine between the two of them, but when they do, they end up in this really awkward situation where they just can't make people laugh. Their comedy just isn't striking with people. And Baba's actually starting to reach a lot of success in other media and is getting out there, where Shibagaki is just kind of doing whatever. He's not really succeeding in too much, but there's just this really interesting dynamic about how one wants to go off into the world and do more stuff while the other is still unsure about it. And their story isn't like fully resolved by the end of the show, since it's revealed that they're going to try to go for one more routine before splitting up, so that way they can end it on a high note. But yeah, their story was actually quite interesting. In fact, there are so many interesting stories in this series that honestly surprised me. It's hard. I can't really talk about all of them in this review because that would take up a lot of time. Like, that'd be a long time to try to discuss every single one. But if I had to discuss some ones that I want to talk about besides the main one with Arakawa, one of them has probably got to be one of the main villain stories in this, from a guy called Tanaka, who ends up becoming like the skull mask person, where he dedicated millions of dollars or so from his own bank account to try to earn this dodo type thing for an app. And when he finally managed to get it, Arakawa just happened to end up running it at that time and made him drop his phone and drop it into water and break it. But he's an interesting villain about how he actually wasn't even really a focus for such a long time. He only made his first main appearance in his own like dedicated episode. Like, there was a full episode dedicated to just his character. That when it was so surprising, since when the episode actually officially ended, I was just like, wait, we just spent an entire episode about this guy's backstory? Dang, that episode flew by fast. Like, I didn't feel like that went by. I didn't feel like it took any time at all. I felt like it went by very quickly. And his whole character, especially since at the end, after he finally kind of got some payback on the one he thought that he was the person who sucked him out of all the money, once he has kind of getting payback on them, he decides that he would commit suicide, only to then immediately go back on after seeing Arakawa like drive his taxi off of a bridge at one point at the end of the series, where he's trying to drive away from these punks. But basically, his whole character is very interesting, about especially since he's kind of a background villain yet feels like kind of a menace, and it really adds to the whole story. And yeah, just he's a very interesting character. The other thing I would like to kind of talk about in terms of character is definitely the whole thing with the Sakura Cat Lady and the idol group, since they end up getting quite involved with Arakawa, especially since there's this fan called Amai who's just like super dedicated to cheering on the idol group and really wants to show his support for them. It's such an interesting story, seeing how they try to get into situations and end up messing with a lot of things. Just overall, I felt like their story was quite interesting, as well as they ended up having to work with Arakawa to put down Dobu, who is like the main, or one of the main threats in this series. Just their whole thing with the dead teammate and all that stuff was very interesting to me, and I definitely found it to be quite intriguing, especially since they were, like many, kind of more in the background and didn't play too much of a role as much as a lot of the others, but they still played a pretty massive role in the end, which was very interesting. But as much as I do like talking about a lot of the other stories in this series, because I really did love this anime, one of the ones that definitely stood out the most to me was the big plot twist at the end, which I thought which goes involved with the whole thing about why they're all animals. I thought they were going for like a Zootopia-like vibe, where they just had the animals be animals and there was no real reason to it. They just were animals. Granted, Zootopia took advantage of the animals, like they were part of the story. I thought this story was just having the animals there in order to kind of like make it feel more noticeable, because it's pretty easy to get an interest more in talking animals than it is humans. Like, humans are definitely a lot harder to make an impression on as much as animals are. So I thought that was just an aesthetic choice. But then the final episode reveals that the reason we've been seeing animals this whole time is because we've been following Arakawa's perspective, as he can't really talk with humans. So he sees the entire world as animals. Even though everybody's human, everybody is fully human, he sees them all as animals, including seeing himself as a walrus, even though he is also human. And it was such an intriguing and crazy twist, especially since it turns out it was kind of like a coping mechanism in order to keep himself sane and stuff like that. I don't know if that was the case of that, but I know that he did say in his journal and stuff that he was able to talk with animals more, or at least he was able to focus more with animals than he was with humans, and that's why he was able to talk with everybody, because he saw them all as animals. And it was so crazy, especially when we ended up going to him returning to seeing humans again. And it's so interesting to see all the characters look like humans. It's just so weird, because we've been seeing them as animals this whole show, and seeing them actually be their human selves was quite the shock to me. And It was probably the craziest twist of the entire show. It caught me completely off guard. I did not think that there was an actual purpose to them all being animals. I just kind of accepted that as a thing. But yeah. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about here has got to be the really kind of frustrating ending. It would be frustrating, at least, if the movie they released a little while later did come out. Basically, at the end of the series, the killer that I mentioned before is talking about how she needs to finish up some loose ends and ends up getting into Otokawa's taxi, as we're now focusing on the human side of things. He's no longer an animal. Everyone looks like humans now. And it seems like it's hinting at something going to happen. And then after that, just ends. The show just ends. And when I saw that, I thought, really? That's what you're ending this on? But then they released the movie, which kind of reveals that basically she tried to attack him, only for her to be captured, and he managed to get out of there safely, except for being slightly injured. You know, it did say he was injured in the news report, but it was really interesting that they wrapped it up there, because if that movie did not exist, I probably would have lowered the rating a bit for this, because I thought that ending was kind of frustrating, since I wanted to see how this concluded. But overall, I still love this anime so much. It does have a few issues here and there where I find to be kind of meh, but not any big issues. There's nothing massive with this anime that I disliked. Overall, I definitely enjoyed it a lot, and I found a lot of interest in all the different characters that were introduced in this show, and I just had such a good time, and I can see why so many people praise the show, because it really is awesome. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and one of my final thoughts, honestly, I really like this anime. It's one of my favorite animes right now. It's definitely up there in my top 10. I loved it a lot. I can see why people like it. It was so much fun. I enjoyed this anime. I could happily rewatch this. It was a great time, and while it's not perfect, it's very good, and that's why I give Odd Taxi a very high 9 out of 10. Love this anime a lot. Really enjoyed the characters, the world, and everything else. It was super interesting, and overall, I just really enjoyed myself. That's all I really have to say, so thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I was looking to do anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!